So today we are starting with spread 8C, and 8C looks at this concept of conformity. So we're going to learn about what conformity is. We're going to look at a key experiment that was conducted about conformity, and we are also going to look at the factors that influence why people conform or why conformity happens in society. So I just asked some of you who'd come in a bit early or come in on time to talk about or to identify one word that you thought first came into your mind when you heard the word conformity. So some of you have written fitting in. A lot of you have mentioned that it's a social influence. Okay. Some of you have mentioned that it's about similarity, and others have mentioned that it's about following or being a follower, which is all correct and all related to the concept of conformity. Okay. So we know what conformity is, but when we link it back to psychology and the actual definition, this is what you'd be expected to know. Okay, conformity basically refers to how we adjust our thoughts, feelings, or behavior. So our mental processes as well as our behavior in ways that follow or that agree with a particular individual or group, okay, to match some accepted standard or some accepted social norms. Okay, that's basically what conformity is. It's about changing in order to fit with the group. And a lot of the time that change constitutes us following, okay, following the group, following the herd, doing the same thing as everyone else. Okay, a lot of the time there are reasons for why we might conform as well. Okay, now examples of conformity that we might see in our everyday life include things like peer pressure. Okay, and we see this a lot in youth, where you might feel pressured to smoke a cigarette because other people in the same group that you're in are doing that. Okay, it doesn't even have to be smoking a cigarette. You might feel pressured to like the same music band that everyone else likes, or the same group that everyone else likes, because everyone in your group likes them, and you don't want to stick out like a sore thumb by not doing the same thing. Okay, using swear words in a conversation because everyone else is also using them. That's another example of conformity. Okay, and this is why we say that the group that you're a part of not only influences your behavior, but even influences your mannerisms, even influences the way you speak. Okay, clapping at the end of the speech. This might not seem like a really clear example of conformity, might just seem like a social norm, but remember, conformity is to do with following not just behaviors that your friends do, but also the social norms of society. So let's say if someone has come to school and they're giving you a speech in assembly, if no one starts clapping once that person has finished speaking, the rest of the people in the room are not going to feel like they want to start. But if someone starts clapping, everyone else kind of joins in. Okay, and that's the idea of conformity, that you're following even when it comes to social norms like clapping. Okay, like for example, shaking someone's hand as you leave the room. You might not have planned to do that, but you saw everyone else doing it, and so you decided to follow. Okay, standing in the same direction as everyone else when you get onto an elevator. This is actually, there was an experiment done on this that was conducted by the same guy, Asch, who basically does the experiment we're looking at today. But there was another experiment he did called the elevator experiment. Okay, and there have been multiple replications or redos of this experiment. It's basically this idea that you get into an elevator and everyone is standing facing towards the door, which is the norm, which is what we normally expect. And then there'll be one guy who, for example, decides to face the opposite way. So he faces towards the opposite way. So he's got his back towards the door, whereas everyone else is facing the door. Okay, and that experiment was to see whether everyone who was facing the right direction would then face the same way as he did and do the wrong thing. Okay, so would we follow people even when we knew that what we were doing was wrong? Okay, or what that person was doing was wrong. Okay, laughing at a scene in a play because everyone else is laughing. Okay, that's another example of conformity. Or changing your fashion style to match that of the group that you socialize with. So that was our kind of cover photo for the front cover of our slide today. Okay, you can see this girl's got her own kind of style, but when she joins in with this group here, they're all wearing striped kind of jumpers. So she kind of fits in and wears the same striped jumper the next day. Okay, so that's an example of how you might change your fashion style to match that of someone else's. Conformity can be good, as we know, but conformity can also be bad as well. Okay, so we'll learn a little bit more about that. So why do we conform in the first place? There are multiple reasons as to why we conform. You just basically need to know at least two. Okay, they're all connected anyway. The first reason we conform is that we conform in order to feel accepted by others in society. Okay, if someone was to, for example, if someone was to give a really good speech, and everyone was clapping, and it was an amazing speech, and everyone's like giving them a standing ovation. So they don't just clap, but they stand up. They're that moved by that person's speech. And you're the only person kind of sitting down, and you're not really looking like you are that moved by the speech. People will kind of look at you in a funny way. People will be like, okay, well, that's disrespectful. Okay. So we do things even when we don't want to, because we want to feel accepted. Okay. We follow the group, or we follow society, even when we don't want to in some aspects. In order to not stick out like a sore thumb, in order to feel accepted, and in order to not seem like an outsider, not to not seem like a different person, to not seem abnormal. Okay, we all want to feel a sense of belonging, and so conformity helps us to achieve that sense of belonging. Okay, another reason is that a lot of the time we feel like we are sane individuals or sane human beings if we can see the world in the same way that everyone else sees the world. Okay, that if we can do the same things that everyone else does, if we can think like them, if we can feel like them, and if we can behave like them, that we are considered mentally stable, that we are sane rather than insane. Okay, so that's another reason why we conform. So a classic psychological study which analyzed conformity, as I said before, was conducted by a man or a psychologist named Asch. Okay, Solomon Asch, and it's called the length of line experiment. It's a very simple experiment, and we're going to watch two videos today about the experiment. We're going to watch the original study, so the original footage back from the 1950s or 1960s. They're the old one, and then we're going to watch a modern day remake of that study. Okay, and unlike Zimbardo's prison experiment, the length of line experiment is very easy to replicate or redo, because there aren't as many ethical principles that were really breached in this study compared to the Milgram electric shock experiment that we did last class, which was studying obedience, or the Stanford prison experiment, which was studying power and status. Okay, so this one's a little bit more tame, you could say. Okay. All right, before we watch the videos, guys, I want you to answer a very simple question, and I want you to put your answer in the chat box. Which line is the same length as X? Okay, it's a very simple question. Which line is the same length as X? Okay, most of you are giving me the same answer. And the answer is B. Okay, that is the answer. That is as clear as day. If I ask a 4-year-old this question or a 3-year-old this question, they'll probably be able to give me more or less the same answer there. Okay, the same line is B. This length of line experiment that Asch did was basically using the same stimulus material, the same question. But what he did was he took a bunch of people into a room, and some of them were in on the experiment. They're what we call as the Confederates. Some of them were in on the experiment, and they were working with Asch. And Asch told these people who were in on the experiment, he told the Confederates, listen, guys, I know that when I ask you this question, you're all going to say B, but for the sake of the experiment, when the other participant from outside comes into the study, I want you to all say the wrong answer. I want you to either say it's A or either say it's C. And whatever you guys say, all of you have to be unanimous. All of you have to say the same thing. So if one of you starts with the incorrect answer A, all of you go with A, okay? And obviously when it comes to the turn of the subject who's come from outside, they're going to start double guessing themselves. They are going to think about whether they want to go with the correct answer or whether they want to follow you. And that was the basis of the experiment, okay? Just to give you some context before we watch the video now. So I'm just going to play the video now. For those of you who want to go back and rewatch it, it's in the slide. So in the notes section of the slide, it's the 3 video links or the 2 video links are there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the recording here while we watch the video, and then we'll unpause it after we're done. Okay, so we just watched the video of the original footage of Asch's experiment, as well as the modern day remake of his study. So this is Solomon Asch right here in the right hand bottom corner. Okay, his aim of his study was to investigate the effect of conformity on an individual who was in an unambiguous situation. Okay. And basically, unambiguous situation means a situation where the individual knows for sure that the answer is correct or right. And that's in part the reason why Asch used the length of line experiment, because you can't really go wrong with answering a question like this. It's not an ambiguous question. It's the simplest, clearest question you could ask someone. Okay, so you should be 100% confident that your answer is correct. but for some reason you get influenced by the rest of the group. So it's kind of like a battle between, do you go with your gut or do you go with the group, as that guy in the video said. Okay. So that's basically the aim of his study. Okay. And we've already looked at this in the video, so I'm not going to go through it again, but you guys get the basic idea. Now, there are two. The version that we watched in the video just before was this version. There's also another version that Solomon Asch did, which was the earlier version, which was this one. Okay, so they're both the same study. Again, when you do an experiment like this, you do it over multiple trials and you redo the experiment, because remember when we did in research methods, we talked about the fact that we want to increase the reliability of the results. So if we can do the experiment again and get similar results, we can say that our results or our findings are high in reliability. So as you can see, he did one in 1951, and then he did one in 1956 with a 5-year time gap. And he found the results were very similar there. Okay, so that's showing you that he was aiming to achieve high reliability. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this again because we already kind of understand the basic idea and we've gone through that experimental videos as well. Okay, with the results summary, again, just some numbers there. These are also in your book. Look, maybe memorize the numbers. Just maybe memorize how many people conformed. So about 74 to 75%, or about 3/4 of the participants did conform to the group answer at least once. Okay. 24%, or just about 1/4 of the participants, actually remained completely independent. They were like, no, I know it's C, I'm going against the group. Okay. And they did not conform at any point of the study. So that's a very small percentage there of people who are ready to stand on their own 2 feet and say, I am not going to go with the group answer. Okay. So you can see that when you're tested alone, with no confederates or no other people around you, you are going to get more than 98% of those judgments correct, because you've got no outside influence or outside group that's pressuring you to answer in a specific way. Okay. And we're going to talk about how when you're given a piece of paper to write on, the answer, to write the answer on, rather than verbally say the answer, your conformity will also decrease because no one can see what you're writing on the paper. Whereas when you're saying it out loud, others can kind of see that and look at you, okay, and give you a look like, what are you talking about, kind of thing. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So just learn these two percentages. About 3/4, or about 74 to 75% of the participants conformed at least once. About 25% remained completely independent, not conforming at all. Okay, that's the 2 percentages you should know. We won't ask you this in a short answer, probably in a multiple choice. If we do ask, we would ask it there. Okay, multiple choice. Alrighty. So why do we conform? So obviously all the participants mentioned that at some point in the study, they did try to conform, okay, or they did doubt their answer or their opinion. So even the people that didn't conform, those 25% of people, they did confess to feeling like their answer was wrong, not feeling like they were 110% correct, but feeling like, you know, double guessing themselves and looking at the lines again and like analyzing them again. Okay, so that shows you the power of conformity in making us double guess or second guess ourselves. Okay, and in the videos that we watched, that we learned that, you know, the participants who did conform either conformed because they didn't want to spoil the experimenter's results, okay, or that they conformed because they didn't want to create any conflict. Okay, and one of the guys in the video says, I know the answer's right, but I don't want to create any waves. Okay, he doesn't want to create any lack of harmony there within the group by being that odd one out. Okay, so the participants who did not conform, obviously they went with their own answer, they went with their gut, but a lot of them confessed to feeling guilty for doing that. Okay, some of those participants in the study who actually, those 25 participants in the study who actually did go with their own answer, not conforming or not following the group, actually even said sorry. They apologized for giving the correct response to the rest of the group because they felt like they were doing some kind of error there. They felt like they were in the wrong for just going with their own gut. Okay, and this is kind of a part of how conditioned we are by society to do things that are in line with everyone else, or to do things that kind of don't kind of like, you know, cause tension for other people. Okay, other participants even mentioned that they felt crazy for standing their ground, or they felt like a misfit, like someone who didn't fit into that group, in that room. Okay, so those are some of the ways that we can relate Asch's study back to those concepts of conformity there. Okay, this is like a little cartoon board comic kind of strip thing that I found on online. I just put it in the PowerPoint because I thought it was kind of cute and Yeah, it's a very simplified version. If you can't be bothered reading the previous slide about the method of the study and how it all was conducted, literally just have a read of this little comic strip thing. It gives you all the details there. Okay. So that's the summary. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. Okay, guys, we just need to go through some of the factors that influence our conformity, and then we're basically done for today. So these are the factors that affect conformity, or that affect whether someone will follow the rest of the group or will adjust their thoughts, feelings, and behavior to be in line with the rest of the group. You can use the memory tip. I know it's a weird one. It's I see dungs. So I as in I see as in see with your eyes, but it's the letter C, and then dungs as in what dung beetles like. So dungs, okay? I see DUNGS. Okay, that's the idea. So the first factor that affects conformity is called informational influence. We saw this in the video when those participants that were not sure about the answer basically went with this particular answer there. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So participants who were not sure of the answer went with this particular answer there. So that's informational influence. Informational influence is when you go along with others because their idea or their behavior makes sense. Okay. For example, if you've arrived into a new country and you haven't actually, for example, driven in that country before, you might actually not know which side of the road to drive on. Okay. And as a result of that, you might actually drive on the wrong side of the road. So if everyone is driving on one side of the road, you follow them because you don't have enough information to stand your ground or to go with your gut or to do otherwise. Okay, that's what informational influence is. Similar thing, if you're going to a new carnival or you're going to a festival or something like that, and you don't know what's the best place to eat. Okay, I had this experience a few months back when I went to Graceland. And I didn't know where to go or, what places were good. So I was kind of just looking at where there was a big crowd, and I was kind of like going there. Okay. And because I didn't have the information, I'd never been there before. So I wanted to look at what other people were going to and follow them. Not because I wanted to be accepted by them, but because I didn't have any better information that would allow me to do otherwise. Okay. So that's basically informational influence there. Okay, the next thing that we're talking about is culture. Okay, when we talk about culture, we're talking about this idea of whether you're in a collectivist culture or an individualist culture. And we talked about these two different types of cultures in the previous lesson as well. Okay, also in the previous chapter. Okay, we talked about the fact that collectivist cultures are cultures where they tend to place group goals ahead of personal goals. Okay, whereas individualist cultures tend to value the importance of independence, okay, the importance of achieving personal goals. So that basically those are the two differences. Now you can imagine where conformity would be greater. Conformity would tend to be greater in countries such as China, okay, where there's a collectivist nature there, okay, where people like to be like everyone else. And it's expected that you be like everyone else, okay? They are promotive of conformity rather than individuality there. Okay, this means that if a Chinese person was the subject or the main participant from outside in this experiment, in the Asch experiment, there would be a higher likelihood that they would conform a lot more than someone who was from an individualist culture. Okay, individualist cultures like Australia, we tend to be more like, independent, me before the world, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like we're less likely to conform, but that doesn't mean we don't conform at all. Okay, but we do value our independence, and we do value the importance of like uniqueness of humans and uniqueness of individuals. So we kind of discourage a person to follow the rest of the group. Okay, that doesn't mean conformity doesn't occur. It's less likely to occur in countries like Australia or America, or westernized nations that are individualist cultures compared to collectivist cultures there. Okay, so that's the effect of culture. De-individuation is that when you're in a group situation, you're more likely to lose yourself in that specific group there. Okay, so you're more likely to lose yourself in that specific group. And that is why de-individuation occurs. De-individuation occurs when you lose yourself in the group, and you're more likely to do things or to follow other people doing extreme things that you wouldn't do when you were alone. So if you think about a protest or something or a rally and you're going there, and you're not usually a violent person, but you see your friend kind of taking swings at the police, and you might actually feel encouraged, or you might feel like it's okay, I can do that, I'm protected by the group. Okay, this is why people tend to behave in very extreme and atypical ways when they're in a group as compared to when they're by themselves. Okay, and we saw this in Asch's experiment. Basically when we've got someone writing the answer on the piece of paper and they're alone, they behave differently compared to when they're with the rest of the group there. Okay, less conformity occurs when we're alone compared to when we're with a group. So that is de-individuation. It's the loss of individuality that occurs, or the loss of independent thought that occurs when you are in a group situation. Unanimity. So what does it mean to be unanimous? When you're unanimous, it means that you are basically all on the same page. Okay, you're all on the same page, you're all unanimous, and that basically means that there is shared agreement. Okay, there's shared agreement by all people in that situation. Now, if a group is unanimous, that also creates pressure to conform. For example, if your friends want to go somewhere to eat, and all of them are saying, let's go Nando's, and they're all like, okay, Nando's, yeah, let's go. And it comes to you and you're the only person who hasn't given a response yet, but everyone else has said Nando's, you're more likely to say, let's go Nando's as well, rather than saying, oh, let's go to a Porter's, or let's go to Macca's, or let's go to, Guzman's or whatever. So basically unanimity creates pressure to conform because you've got more people against you. It's like 4 versus 1, for example, if you're in a group, okay, or 8 versus 1. The more people that are a part of that group, the more likely, the more people that are part of a group and the more unanimous they are with each other, it makes it harder for you to stand out and say something different. Okay, and this was seen in the study as well. When there were more people that were against that one outside participant, that participant was less likely. When there was more people that were against or that were saying something different from the participant was more likely to disregard their own answer and go with the group. But remember, when that participant had a partner, they were kind of looking at each other and smiling at each other and giving the same answer. So conformity decreases as unanimity within the group decreases. Okay, that's the basic idea. Then we've got normative influence. Normative influence is this basic idea that we conform to, we conform or we follow the actions of others in order to be socially accepted, okay? In order to be accepted and liked. This is different from informative influence. Informational or informative influence is basically when we agree or we follow others because we don't know any better, okay? Normative influence is when we know better, but we do it because we want to be liked and accepted, okay? Or we're scared that we're going to be rejected, okay? So normative influence means we don't want to be the odd one out. We don't want to stick out for the wrong reasons. Okay, so that's the basic idea of the group there. So a lot of movies represent the idea of normative influence. For example, Mean Girls, a lot of your teenage kind of TV shows kind of represent this idea as well, that people change themselves in order to be liked by others. Okay, so just remember the main difference between informational and normative. Informational influence is when you conform because you want to be right, you want to be correct, you want to be accurate. Normative influence, on the other hand, is when you conform because you want to be liked, you want to be accepted, you want to be welcomed, and you want to belong. Okay, so that's the basic difference between the two, because sometimes we can ask you maybe to distinguish between those two concepts there. Group size, this is really connected to the idea of unanimity. The bigger the group size is, and the more unanimous these people are with each other, for example, they're all on the same page, the more likely is that when it comes to you, you're going to also feel pressured to be the same as them or to say the same thing or agree with them. Okay. However, if you've got a lot of participants, like let's say 30, 40 participants in the room doing the length of line experiment, conformity actually, after a certain point, conformity actually decreases. And the reason is the more participants you have, the more individual differences in opinion you're more likely to have as well. Okay. So that's basically the idea there of group size. And the last thing that we're looking at is social loafing. So social loafing is the tendency of the individual to make less effort when they're in a group activity compared to when they're working alone. Now, social loafing is something we see if you've ever done a group project. When you do group projects, when you get into university and stuff, you're going to see a lot of social loafing happening. Okay, social loafing happens when you've got people in the group that are working on something and they're giving an equal contribution there, and they are giving their own independent thoughts and coming to agreement. And then you've got one person in the corner that's sleeping or not doing anything. Okay, or they're like, painting the floor. So that's the basic idea, okay, of social loafing. Social loafing is this idea that an individual will make less effort when they're involved in a group activity compared to when they're working alone. Now, you might be thinking, okay, how do we connect this back to conformity? We connect this back to conformity because when these people are discussing an idea and they say, okay, guys, the best way to present this to the class will be through, a PowerPoint presentation. And then they've agreed on that and they've decided, I'm going to do slides 1 to 6. You can do slides 7 to 10. And, this girl can do slides, 11 to 15. And maybe they want this guy to look for the images that relate to each of the slides. So then they're like, hey, wake up, Tom. Tom, wake up. And then Tom's like, okay, yeah, what's happening? And then they're like, Tom, we want you to do the images for the slide, okay? And even without thinking, he's like, yeah, okay, I'm doing that. Yes, all good. So he's actually conformed or followed the thoughts and feelings that these guys had about him doing the images for the PowerPoint without really any protest or without really arguing about it or without asking any extra details. So that's how this guy has conformed in this situation there. Okay, so social loafers are victims of conformity, or they practice conformity because they basically follow the rest of their group. Okay, and they follow with very little effort. They don't ask questions. They just like, okay, tell me what to do, tell me where to be, tell me what's the time for the Zoom, and I'll be there. Okay, so they conform in that aspect. Okay, and that's the basic idea, and that's how you link social loafing to conformity. Okay, that social loafers tend to conform to the rest of the group because they don't put much effort into the group project or the presentation anyway, and so for that reason they're more likely to just go along or follow the rest of the group's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Alrighty, so that's about it for 8C. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording here.